and panicked because none of the medical stuff was helping. The hiccups were getting bigger and louder. So I called Mitch and I said, Mitch, I'm panicking, what do I do, what do I do? And Mitch just said, oh, congratulations, Roger. At first I thought, he's not being empathetic, this is terrible. But then I realized, it took me a couple more days. It took me day 7 of hiccups to realize, oh, Mitch is saying, as he was explaining to me, if you remember that dream that you had a few months ago, that kid inside is speaking to you. Can you listen to him? And so that's what I did, is I finally turned off the phone, I went to bed, and I listened to him. And that was really hard. I had no inner life that was conscious. I had no relationship to the psyche. I didn't know it existed. I was raised in an atheist home where there was no such thing as psyche. There was no such thing as an inner world. So it was really difficult for me to go, oh my God, I actually have a whole inner world of value that I can care about. And then after 2 days of just very kind of frustrated, sickly listening to this voice, I was able to then have a visceral sense of, oh, this is this kid inside of me, this crushed gay boy who really suffered as a kid in a very homophobic world growing up in Massachusetts in the 60s and 70s, and that I could actually have a relationship to him. I could listen to him, I could care for him, I could talk to him. But this is just the beginning in what Mitch is offering around psychological responsibility. I imagine you've all heard about inner child work and having a relationship with that. And John Bradshaw has published bestsellers about working with your inner child. What Mitch is saying is that's just the beginning of the work. Just like coming out as gay is a metaphor for just the possible beginning of individuation, to use a Jungian term, or self-realization, that coming out as gay is just the beginning, a very important beginning step, because there's a way that coming out process for any person who goes through that, whatever your identity, there's a way that coming out process it is a level of becoming psychological, of reflecting on some inner force, this Uranian eros that Doug and Chris have mentioned, this inner force or intelligence in the psyche that says you are attracted to the same sex, even though everyone around you is saying, no, you should be straight. So if we can ongoingly listen to that inner voice, Mitch is saying in Psychological Responsibility, then that can be the beginning of a lifelong journey into the psyche and into a deeper connection with the psyche. Just to fast forward to just a couple of months ago, around what is Uranian eros, there's so many different theoretical and conceptual ways to talk about that. You can talk about it as that there's a spirit in the, this is a male perspective, there's an analogous perspective for women or for transgender people, but that you imagine that there's a spirit in the dick that has its own power and interest. My dick is attracted to another guy. You could say that that is an intelligence, that the psyche is drawn to images which it then internalizes as symbols. So I had a dream a couple months ago that I'm giving you just a snippet of the dream, which is that I was walking down a rural street near where I grew up, and this giant, this big man, almost twice the size of me, big muscly guy, like Tom of Finland almost character, came and basically kidnapped me, and he wrapped his arms around me in this intense embrace and would not let me go, and I was completely terrified. And that, the way I'm understanding that dream as I'm working with it from a gay-centered perspective, is that that was an encounter with Uranian eros. That he is powerful, intense, hard dick turn on. And if you're a lesbian, a big clitoral turn on. But in this case, I'm talking about my own experience. And that Uranian eros experience in the dream, you can see that to really open up to the psyche is not any picnic. It is, Mitch actually describes it at one point in the second chapter. He says how challenging it is for anyone to seek self-awareness within that personal realm, which is oneself in the funhouse mirrored halls of gripping psychological defenses. We're all, so to speak, trapped, pre-psychologically trapped in a funhouse mirror world of projections and defenses and dissociation. And I myself have been deeply trapped in that world. And it's still very much a work in progress. But this dream that I had, in a way, the earlier work that I did with that crushed gay boy inside, the more references, if you will, my object relations or my childhood experience, the more that I can work with that level of my gay shadow or trauma, then the more possibility I have to have an actual felt, immediate in the moment connection to Uranian eros, to this homosexual turn-on. And the more that we can all have our own individual version of that, according to Mitch, the more that we can then supply the inspiration for true homosexual liberation, or gay liberation, or whatever, human liberation. I'm sorry, there's my toxic shame coming up. So there's a way that I can get ahead of myself, get into my head. Part of it is that I get excited about the ideas, and then this is exactly what's happening, is that there's a way that if you tap into the electricity of the psyche, that it will actually respond back to you, but it can be quite overwhelming, and then I start to stutter and babble. To kind of come full circle, before I turn it over to you, Dustin, the more as therapists and human beings and LGBTQA people, the more that we can, each of us in our own individual way, be present with both the trauma of growing up in a heteronormative, consumerist, violent society, the more that we can come to terms with that as it's constantly infecting us and invading us, then the more that we can open up to the creative and loving potentials of the gay psyche.
And liberate ourselves.
And liberate ourselves.
More profoundly.
Yes, and liberate ourselves from defenses, from trauma, and into hope.
Potential.
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 Creative potential we don't even know. Yes. Yeah.
When you guys talk about your the space of this, of being able to have this type of liberating moment, and I think it's different for everyone.
Sure.
I think it's recent on 2 occasions I did like a 10-day where there was no talking, no writing, no anything, where you really have to sit with all of your stuff and you have to face it. Because there's a lot of times we get distracted, whether it be going here, going there, and you're not able to face any of it. And so I think being in that space, having that self-observation, and it's almost like you're in a prison. You know, you talk to a lot of people who've been in prison or have done prison work. That's where they're really able to sit with their stuff. And then, you know, read or whatever that they can do in order to make that transformation process.
Absolutely. It is interesting to compare a more Buddhist-oriented mindfulness practice with Jungian active imagination. I think they are in many ways leading towards the same goal, but they are very different practices. And from a Jungian perspective, we actually, one way to look at this is that, because I used to be a member of Zen Center, and Mizumi Roshi, who was this great Japanese Roshi, when I asked him, well, what about homosexuality, he said, oh, not important, not important. Because from a Zen perspective, it's not important.
Yeah, no self.
No self. So from this more Jungian gay perspective, it's very important. And so that is...
It's essential.
It's essential. It's essential. Yes, and so that is a whole different angle. And I think there's ways to reconcile them, but it is also really, I think, valuable to look at the differences between those systems.
So in a meditation like that, we'd want to actually perhaps even focus on the self as gay. You know, and have that as a meditation. I was going to talk about a meditation when my turn, so I'm sorry to sorry.
Okay, so I'm Dustin, and I'm going to go next. I just noted, I want to kill Chris, I want to,
Kill me!
Oh yeah.
I'm used to it.
Kleinius. I'm glad you guys are kind of prepped.
We've all known each other for many, many years. Many years. What, 17, 18?
Yeah.
25?
25, 23.
Yeah.
So I want to kill you.
Part of you wants to.
But part of me, yeah. So I'm just, noticing my anxiety rising as, hearing from Doug and Roger and Chris, you've been involved a lot, and I'm just noticing different things. So for instance, I can feel myself pulling back while you guys kind of come forward and you're excited and anxious, and so I'm having different processes around that. So part of me, I can feel a kind of shame and insecurity, like why can't I be, I'm inspired by this, by trying to be gay-centered and working on my shadow and connecting with gay eros, yet speaking of blockages, I'm constantly having a counter force inside of me that for me brings up my own childhood. Growing up with a single parent, my mother was a waitress, and basically I grew up in poverty, and I have a lot of humiliation around that comes up regularly, and I think it shows up in different ways. So for instance, this feeling like I don't really have a voice, or I don't really matter. So there's a tendency for me to constantly want to withdraw or pull away. And so I've been trying to look at that and be present with that feeling place inside of me as I'm sitting here, hearing you guys talk in these really deep ways, and you're showing up emotionally. So I'm trying to be present with that, and so I'm in the middle of it. So part of me wishes I could just feel, turn on and let's talk about being gay-centered and let's talk about dealing with the shadow. Yet, for the reality of my psyche is that there's a lot of intense, unresolved emotional issues around really being who I am as a gay person and feeling good about that. But it also feels good to try and work on that and struggle with it. So I'm going to focus on the third section in Gay Liberation at Psychological Crossroads. And in that section, Mitch Walker talks a lot about some of his childhood experiences discovering himself as gay and what that was like. And he had a lot of, if you get a chance to read that section, a lot of really profound sexual, romantic, deep experiences around discovering himself as a homosexual kid. And his first experience was when he was 11, and this would have been in the early 60s. But rather than maybe focusing on his entire trajectory, I thought what I would do is focus on a particular moment for him, and then draw a parallel that I have around my own experiences around feeling gay eros and my challenges with that. So something that particularly struck me in that third section is Mitch's, he had just written his master's thesis for Men Loving Men, a gay sex and consciousness guide that was pretty, I think it was fairly well known at the time. It's still in print. And he also had a romantic sexual relationship with another gay man that was fulfilling and reciprocal. And right at that time, he was about 23. The school rejected his master's thesis because they said it was too homosexual, and his lover left him for his wife, the lover's former wife. And so Mitch was going through this extraordinarily intense descent into kind of questioning everything that he was doing and feeling caught in really horrible emotional states. And at the time, there was a particular moment where he was watching television, and the Frankenstein, a made-for-TV show, or made-for-TV movie called Frankenstein had come out. This was in the early 70s. And as Dr. Frankenstein was unwrapping the monster, in air quotes, Mitch was imagining, there's going to be this like grotesque, disgusting, what's this guy going to look like? And as they unwrapped the bandages, it turned out that it was actually this really gorgeous guy, who Mitch described had this loving look in his eyes. And at that moment, Mitch describes having an apotheosis, which I'm sure I'm not going to have the best definition for, but basically